The Diecast Misfits have invited the building community to join them in a December build. It seems Rudolph is getting a little older and rebellious, so Santa decided he wanted a vehicle handy to deliver presents, just in case. When I ordered this Johnny Lightning Movin van casting off eBay, it was described as a topper casting, one of the really old, before Praying Mantis castings. When it arrived, as you can kind of see here, I discovered it was a commemorative edition and not an original. It's old, but it's not that. It's not ancient, like me. Well, Santa doesn't mind, so I went ahead and worked on the casting. The posts are interesting. There's one really deeply set in, and then that super short front one. And in addition to that, there were these little plastic parts coming off that engine that were still holding this casting together. The glass kind of fits in there, and the engine holds the glass in place. It's just interesting. Really, really interesting how this thing's held together. And I know off working off some of the topper castings, like for engines on those, they didn't use anything. I mean, they used some glue sometimes, but otherwise they were just pressed on. Well, one thing this thing needed was different wheels. So went to a Muscle Machines casting. And I had been told before, oh yeah, you can swap axles out on the Muscle Machines. And I wasn't able to on some of them that I had. But this one you are able to. The wheels actually come apart. They're two pieces, in addition to the rubber tire around them. They're not all that way. And the ones I had done before weren't that way. Well, for this, it works out great. Because I am able to change the axles out on this, get them to the size I want, and without a lot of work. Where other times, I was in some situations sometimes, if you remember some of the builds, where because of needing to use an axle tube and not being able to change the axle out, I had very little of that original axle to work with. Now you may see I ground down the little metal that was holding the original axles in place. And I'm going to use the same approach that Johnny Lightning used to hold those axles in. I'm not putting axle tubes on this thing. I'm not doing anything real fancy down here. As most of you know who do these things, it doesn't take a lot to hold these axles in place. And so what the plan is I'm going to mask off when I go to paint and stuff, those two little spots on each axle of the metal that hold the axle in place. And then I'm just going to put JB Weld over it. Shocker, huh? Now you see how the axle fits right in the groove perfectly. So it seems silly to do anything differently. I hope you agree with me. But that's what I'm doing. At this point, I decided to drill and tap the back post. Fortunately, that has a huge back post to work with. Used a 256 screw on that. Used the tap to tap the 256 hole for the 256 screw. Then there's not a lot going on with the base. I mean, I'm not doing really a lot of work to it. Cleaned it up a little bit, throw it in the IPA to get any residue off. And then I shot it white. And you can't really see there, but I did mask off, like I said, those areas that will hold the axle in place. I did do decals for the tail lights. Yeah, they're real fancy. They're red dots with a black circle around them, but they're tail lights. I did use Citadel lead belcher busted out the lead belcher again. Seems like it's been a little while since I've used the lead belcher, just to paint that the floor of the cockpit, or whatever you want to call it. The I guess Santa flies this thing around in a way, but the interior of the floorboard on it, I decided to go ahead and paint with the lead belcher. Painted a little bit past that, past where the front windshield would be, into that engine area, just a little. But just to give it a little difference than the white, I used glue dots to cover these. And that probably was stupid. Thinking about it now, I probably should have just used small pieces of masking tape. Probably would have worked better as far as peeling them off. But I have those glue dots handy, and unfortunately, sometimes I think I turn to them in a pinch as a very quick and easy thing to do, because they are so handy. I mean, they're just on a roll, and you can just pluck those off of there and they stick to anything. You'll see me use them again in this build later, but in that situation, they seem to work really well for what I wanted. Here, it's almost like I was using them in a way like a liquid mask. And just thinking about it, it really wasn't a situation where a liquid mask was appropriate. Just a little bit of tape would have been so much easier. But hey, it all turns out well in the end. Spoiler alert. Yeah, JV Weld makes its appearance, of course. Even though I'm mixing up what seems to be a lot there, I'm using very little. And you'll see this in just a second. Again, just very little. I'm not coating the whole axle with it. I'm just going over those bumps of metal that I ground half of, basically, to pop the old axles out. This casting is much better, or much easier in a way, to pop the axle off of than the original topper castings. The original topper castings, at least the ones I've worked with, the axle is the entire length of the axle is much more recessed into the metal. And you may have seen that already in other builds of mine, but yeah, this was easier to do. Here's a mistake. I did pull the headers off of another casting I had. Johnny Lightning had a lot of swappable parts, and since the one was broken on this, I pulled this off of another one. Translucent green, in case you're curious, is the direction I go. Very quickly on the headers, the Molotow did not work on the headers. They're a weird, softish plastic. It just didn't work. And so what I ended up doing with the headers is shooting them with primer, then shooting them with a silver paint. And they're not fantastic, but they're a lot better than they looked with the Molotow. I did do some custom white toner decals for this. I knew ahead of time the direction I wanted to go with this build. I knew I wanted the green base, or the white base with the green body. The glass has kind of a greenish tint to it already, so it goes well with that. And I did a build for last Christmas, the Santa Speeder, that I did in white and green, and I loved how that turned out. So I wanted to follow that again this year for this particular build. And I'm happy with the results. And I knew I wanted to do white toner decals for it with no other color in the decals. I just wanted them to be white. Fortunately, the rear post really holds this thing together well, even though I do glue the front post. And again, you may recall from before, the engine also helps hold this in place. And so it's an interesting way they do the engine. There you see the headers that are sprayed silver. The engine had a couple little rough areas on it that I went over with the Molotow pen. And I did some black detail on the front of the engine, like the belts, but nothing too fancy. It's an odd shape engine header combination on there. And I do glue that in place underneath as well to really anchor this down. There's the glue dots again. That's how they come on a roll, and there's a boatload of them on that roll. And so I thought, well, let me use a couple of those to hold Santa in place. If I ever need to, I can rip Santa out of there and put some other character in there, or take pictures of it without Santa, or however I want to do it. Santa's not going anywhere. Those glue dots will hold him in place really well. I just used a couple of them, in case you couldn't tell. But I do like how this works out. I like how I left the seats white, because I wanted that contrast against the green as well. So there's where we started with the topper, not topper, topper commemorative Johnny Lightning casting. The wheels, I mean, come on, guys. Really? You'll see what we did with it here. There you see how it's an odd configuration, how the headers sit up, how everything sits up high. But there's where we ended up. The North Pole Express delivery with brake lights. I think the wheels are a huge improvement on this. I'm very happy with how this build turned out. It's what I imagined, with I think the only difference is I thought the headers I'd be able to chrome. And again, it was just a nightmare. So it was best not doing that. And I am happy with the results. Don't get me wrong. I am really happy with the results. So there's some glamour shots coming up. I'd like to thank the Diecast Misfits for hosting this event. Be sure and check out all of the builds in this invitational. I do have a link to the Diecast Misfits YouTube channel in the description of this video. There's also hashtag DCMFDEC2022 build to help you find the other builds. So I hope you like this. I'm pretty happy with it. The white and green really work for me, and I hope you feel the same way. So everybody, stay safe and healthy out there, and I'll catch you in the next one.